Welcome to Classics Confidential, and I'm here in Rome talking to Professor Bernard Fischer, who is the director of the Virtual World Heritage Laboratory, which is at Virginia University.
Yes.
You describe yourself as a virtual archaeologist. Can you just briefly explain what that is?
With virtual archaeology, what we do is we try to provide help to archaeologists in all phases of the project, from field work to analysis and study after the field work is done, and to final publication of the results. And the way I got into the field was by my love of ancient Rome, and I am a Roman archaeologist. When I was a fellow right here at the American Academy in Rome, which I was from 1974 to 76, the Mellon professor at the time, Frank Brown, who was the greatest Roman archaeologist of his generation, always started by taking the new fellows to see the physical model of ancient Rome, the Plastico di Roma Antica, in the Museum of Roman Civilization. And this is this great monument that took 40 years to make. It shows the city at a scale of 1 to 250. It's made out of plaster of Paris. And it's itself a historic monument. And I had come to archaeology and study of antiquity from a background which saw a kind of unity of the arts and sciences and technology. When I was a teenager, I had a third-class radio license, and I started the radio station in my high school. I composed electronic music, and you know, I had an uncle who was an electrical engineer, another uncle who owned movie theaters. And so for me, the arts and sciences were always very united. Looking at this monument from the point of view of a classicist and archaeologist, I thought there should be some technology that could get this monument out of this rather obscure suburban museum that hardly anyone visited back then. I think even now very few people visit it, and get it to the people of the world, besides just photographs. And so I started working with an urban planner at Berkeley, Donald Appleyard, who was a senior fellow at the Academy, and who had developed this system for combining models with video clips of the parts of the cities where the proposed building would, would be built, so that the general public at zoning hearings could make a bit more informed decision about whether the design of a building was appropriate or not for their city. And Donald said we could use that same technology for this model of ancient Rome, and we could make it much more comprehensible than it is even when you go there. And so we started working on that, and unfortunately he died unexpectedly of a heart attack at a young age, and that was in the late 70s. And then I found out about digital technology, and that's how I got into it, through the Aspen video disc project that Nick Negroponte, who later became the head and founder of the Media Lab at MIT, was involved with in the late 70s. And that used video disc technology to take a lot of photographs, panoramic photographs taken every meter in Aspen, Colorado, to make it possible to do a virtual tour of Aspen. And I thought we could do that with the physical model of ancient Rome. We could put a little camera on the streets and stop every centimeter and take a 360 panorama, and weave those all together and make them randomly accessible on a video disc, so you could recreate the experience of going down the streets of Rome. And I got Apple Computer to sponsor that, and I worked with Alan Kay, who's still an advisor and friend, and who's always described as the inventor of the Macintosh. Actually was the developer of the graphical user interface when he was at Xerox PARC in the early 70s. And we studied the possibility of doing this, but then we discovered that actually 80% of the surfaces of that physical model have no detail, no doors, windows, nothing. Because the model makers, of course, were under budget constraints, as we all are, and they knew that the model would be seen from a balcony around the room. And so they didn't bother to put detail on all the parts that you couldn't see. And that means if you photographed it very, rigorously, comprehensively, you would generally see nothing of any interest. You would just see white stucco with no detail. So then I had to abandon that approach, but the idea had been planted in my mind of doing a model of Rome, and a digital model at that. And so in the late 80s, IBM started to work on 3D modeling technology, and luckily for me, they used Pompeii as their test bed. And they put on a show in London that I saw.
Were you involved in that?
I was not involved at all, only as a consumer. I went to this show, which was, I remember, I think in Scotch House, but anyway, right around Brompton Road there. and I saw for the first time a 3D model made from the ground up of buildings in Pompeii, and I thought, why don't we do that for Rome? So I started doing that at UCLA, which then it turned out had a lab called the Urban Simulation Lab that was doing a digital model of Los Angeles. So that's how I, got into doing this. But I think it all goes back to my interest as a child, really, in using technology as a support for the arts and humanities.
Well, we saw a clip of a journey through your virtual Rome yesterday, and it was mind-blowing. It was very, very exciting, and there were lots of details in there, like trees and people.
Yes.
Is it quite a challenge sometimes to know what details to add in, or controversial, I imagine?
Indeed. It came out in the questions yesterday, the difference between a model and a replica. We're making a model, so it's a reduction. It can't have every person, every animal, every tree. For one thing, we don't have any evidence about that. So we have to put in representative trees and people and activities, carts and so on, even graffiti. But we can't go overboard. We only can put in a few typical representations, and then we have to make it easy to sort of click on an object and get the information about the evidence and the hypotheses behind the creation of what you're seeing. So one of the things that we always like to say is that these are knowledge representations, but also ignorance representations. So we tell you in what we call the paradata, or that information you get when you click on a model, about all the evidence and hypotheses behind the model.
And alternative reconstruction.
And alternative reconstruction. We give you all that information, but we also tell you what we don't know. And often, usually, in the case of the past, what we don't know far outweighs what we do know. So a knowledge representation is also implicitly an ignorance representation, but the ignorance is a stimulus to getting more knowledge.
Yeah.
And I can show you examples of that that have come out of the work, where we work with experts, they pour out everything they know from their brains into code, and we express that digitally. And then we find out there's a gap, and they had not realized there was a gap. One scholar discovered that in his reconstruction of a basilica, a law court in the Roman Forum, he forgot to tie two floors together by a staircase. In another case, we discovered that in our model, in the area between the Capitoline Hill, the foot of the Capitoline Hill, and the Senate House, we had nothing. Well, there obviously was something. So we started looking, and we found an unpublished 1530 engraving by Martin van Heemskerk that showed that this great statue of Marforio, now in the Capitoline Museum and moved there in the 17th century, had originally been there in the Forum. We knew it was somewhere around there, but we didn't know exactly where, but this engraving shows us exactly where, so now we've put that into the model to fill that void. So the ignorance has been filled by new knowledge, but it was the knowledge seeking was stimulated by precisely making formal and explicit what the ignorance is, as well as the knowledge.
That's really interesting, and one of the many benefits of this exciting form of digital humanities. Thank you so much. I'll put a link to the Rome Reborn project on the website so people can explore it for themselves.
Thanks for your interest.
Thank you.